welcome to our Digital Skills Acceleration series. Today we're talking about understanding intent as we continue to educate you on some of the latest going on in the digital space. My name is Jon Panker. I'm TechTarget's Managing Director for Asia Pacific. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dave Lane, our Director of Customer Success in APAC, and Dave is going to help us understand a little bit more about the intent landscape. Our goal here is to tell you what's happening in intent, but really help you evaluate providers. So to that end, we'll be wrapping up today by giving you a list of questions that you might want to ask any potential partner before you start working with them. We're going to keep it pretty quick today. Our goal is to wrap up within 20 minutes or so. And we will also try to offer you a little bit of perspective on TechTarget's positioning in the intent space. Let me tell you a bit about our featured speaker. It's Dave Lane. He is a 10-year industry veteran. Dave has worked in various roles in customer success, client consulting, product management. He directs TechTarget's Asia Pacific customer success team. And in that role, he's assisting about 70 different TechTarget customers, all of whom are B2B tech organizations, and helping them leverage intent data to propel their activities across marketing and sales. And of course, he's got a team of client consultants who work with him. So today we're going to be presenting a bunch of FAQs directly to Dave and getting his answers. And we're going to start out with a very simple one, Dave. How do you define intent data?
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point. I think whenever we talk about intent data, I think it's important to define and look at what real purchase intent data does and should be for marketers. And overall, the way that I look at it and the way that we look at it here at TechTarget is its ability to provide you, actionable insights, right? Who's doing that research, where they're doing it, the volume. But then more importantly, right, there should be an ROI metric driven against it, right? So the way I look at it is it's about going beyond just lookalike lists. It's focusing on a set of target accounts and being able to understand specifically who should I be in front of at that account, and then more importantly, what are their tendencies, right? What's their behavior look like? The other thing, and I touched on it before, but it's something that we talk a lot at TechTarget about, is this idea that activity matters, right? That it's not just good enough to say, I know that Jon Panker works at TechTarget. It's better and more important to know about what Jon Panker cares about, right? The observed intent aspect of it, to be able to understand, the recency of that activity, the relevancy, the volume, because when you think about what you need to do with that data is, ultimately once you receive it, you need to engage somebody with it. You need to send them an email. You need to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And we know that through activity, that through engagement, and more importantly, understanding what that buyer or what that prospect cares about, you're going to raise the click-through rates of an email. You're going to convert more opportunities. And then ultimately, right, which is what everybody wants, every marketer, every sales rep, everybody, they want to close one business. So ultimately, all of that, once you're observing that data and you're messaging and giving them relevant content, you're ultimately going to see more success when it comes down to that bottom line pipeline.
So Dave, quick question for you before we move on to our next FAQ. You mentioned that intent data is a great way to understand dynamics within accounts that you're targeting. Mm-hmm. I'd imagine it's also a really good way to understand accounts that you should be targeting. Yeah,
I think so too. I think that, we as marketers sometimes just get so hyper-focused on our quote unquote must-win accounts, right? Our MWCs or MWAs, that you lose sight of the rest of the market. So again, while you're focused on sort of the for, I guess, to borrow a baseball term, right, you're keeping your eye on the ball, so to speak, with that intent data and those contacts and accounts you want to focus on. It's still important to take a step back and say, okay, where am I seeing my opportunities, right? Where am I seeing a lot of that traction? So should I also deploy some resources? Should I also take a look and see, hey, this particular vertical is doing really well. Should I run a marketing campaign? Or should I, alert the sales team that, hey, there's probably something going on here that we should be focusing on?
All right, great. So question number 2, let's talk about the differences in the type of intent that you can collect. What is the difference between first party, second party, and third party intent data?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I will say this is fairly easy and obvious, right? When we talk about first party data, that's your data, right? That's the data that sits within your Marketo, it sits within your Salesforce or whatever automation or CRM tool, right? That's yours. You know, you're messaging against it, you know, you're actively engaging them through sales and marketing outreach. That's first party data, right? Second party data is organizations like TechTarget, LinkedIn, Discover.org, right? They operate that database. They're continuing to cultivate it to understand, okay, what's going on. In the case of TechTarget, constantly sending out emails, relevant emails based on what we're observing from a buyer behavior. You know, the other one, and this is a little bit more of a step back, right? It's third party view. It's more of a, you know, taking a look at the ocean and trying to identify, you know, a fish or a school of fish. And I think that's the thing to understand, right? First party is your data. Second party is a little bit closer, right? Because it's observed and, you know, again, it's from a direct provider who's engaging, right? And then third party, it's taking that step back and just seeing, you know, overall what's going on.
Okay.
And then the other thing, right, and you know, we just talked about, you know, first, second, third party. There's a layer underneath it, right, that breaks it down into a few different ways, right, which is what we're talking about right now, intent data, trying to identify those accounts that are currently in market that would have that propensity to make a purchase with you. You know, the second one that we predictive, right, which is understanding and kind of anticipating, you know, who we should be going after, right, who might be ready to, you know, make a purchase. And then the last one, right, which is one that I think is near and dear to a lot of marketers' hearts and sales hearts as well too, contacts. You know, being able to, you know, get those contacts that are appended to that list that you're trying to, again, match back to based on activity. So trying to find that activity and match it with those contacts. And, you know, I will say, John, that it's very difficult when you do it across multiple different providers, right? Because they're not all talking to each other, right? You know, the contact provider isn't necessarily in lockstep with the predictive and the intent provider. And I think that's, you know, really what makes TechTarget unique is that it's somewhat of an end-to-end solution, right? It's the contacts, it's the intent data through Priority Engine, which is our data tool to understand, you know, from a predictive perspective and from an intent perspective, who has that propensity to buy underneath any specific topic.
All right, great. Let's move on to our third FAQ. What are some primary use cases for intent data? And Dave, I'm hoping you can talk about use cases both from a sales and a marketing perspective.
Yeah, no, and this one is one that's very close to me because this is, you know, really what me and my team do on a day-to-day basis is help teams, marketing teams and sales teams, excuse me, execute on these use cases. And what we're looking at here is what are, you know, quote unquote 20 very easy to do use cases. As you can see, there's a lot. There's a lot for sales and there's a lot for marketing to do. You know, really, that's the challenge, is the starting point. So I think one of the things that we could do is maybe take a look now and maybe just look at 3 very simple use cases that a lot of partners that I work with use on a day-to-day basis. So this is actually something that we'd be able to see within, you know, within our Priority Engine, and being able to break it down and show you in sort of the next slide or the next view, excuse me. So like I mentioned, these 3 simple use cases are first sales territories. This is really popular, right? Being able to take, you know, my territory as a sales rep and upload it into Priority Engine, or because we have a Salesforce integration or connected app between a client Salesforce and TechTarget Priority Engine, right? Being able to show the territory in real time. This also applies to ABM lists as well too, right? A marketer who has a set of accounts that, you know, they need to go after, they need to activate and engage with marketing promotions and marketing copy. So it's not just reserved for sales territory uploads, very big in terms of ABM and engaging accounts that way. You know, the other way, and this is where a lot of marketers that I work with gravitate towards, is filling the funnel based on specific topics or based on specific pillars, right? In the view that we're looking at now within Priority Engine, we're focused on the cloud security market. That's a very broad market, and not everybody who looks at cloud security, quote unquote, does cloud security. They do topics that fall underneath it, and the products and the solutions that they put forth align back to those topics. So that's really the way that, again, through marketing, through leveraging this data, right, this intent data and what we have within Priority Engine, what we're able to do, right, is align back topically to whatever those pillars or those products look like from a marketing or from a partner perspective. And then the last one, it's a bit more of a granular approach. It goes beyond just looking topically, and this is for those use cases where you're really looking to target specific areas of an employee size, right? So an enterprise, SMB, mid-market or something like that. Right. The other one for pushing out vertically targeted campaigns. Say, for example, you have a case study with a financial organization. I think it would, make sense, right? Wouldn't you want to get that in the hands of every other financial organization that's doing research to sort of allow for your own customer to wave the pom-poms and say, hey, check out how awesome this vendor is because they did so much for us.
Okay, so Dave, just to make sure that we're fully explaining everything well enough for everybody to comprehend it, with each of these views, we would be able to filter TechTarget's intent data so that, for instance, in case number one, sales reps could come in and only see intent as it lives within accounts within their territory, collect prospects who work within accounts that they're responsible for propelling, right? So that is a unique view just for sales reps. So they, in essence, have a playbook into the accounts that they're tasked with selling into, and also are collecting net new contacts, correct?
Exactly. You call it a playbook. I think of it more so as a treasure map for reps.
Okay. And then in instance number two, where we're fueling nurture streams, and we're going to talk a little bit more about integration in just a second, but that is a direct upload, if you will, from a client's marketing automation platform, from TechTarget's priority engine into a client's marketing automation platform, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And then in instance number three, where we're hyper targeting, we're thinking more about specific campaigns and cutting lists and getting insights around those lists as they relate directly to a campaign that may be in market. And you talked about one, for instance, specific to the financial services industry.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So let's move on now to that integration question. Can intent data be integrated into Salesforce automation, marketing automation, or any other systems out there?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, and it should be. Right. The long answer we'll talk about, and first, the first thing to understand is, of course, can you integrate it, right? Are you working with a partner who can seamlessly push over the data directly into your marketing automation system or directly into your CRM? And I think that's something that's really important, right? Is to understand, somebody that I'm working with able to manipulate the fields of the spreadsheet, or through an API integration, right? Directly put contacts over, from, for example, TechTarget Priority Engine into Marketo or Eloqua or something like that. The other thing, and I think this is something where a lot of marketers sort of, not because they're not paying attention to it, but I just don't think it's commonly thought of. But it's not just about providing new records and new contacts. That's always important, right? To make sure that you're bringing contacts in, and they're the newest, they're the latest, or the greatest. But there's also something to be said when we talk about it within the realm of intent data of also updating existing records, updating existing information around these accounts. And again, it goes back to this idea of being able to understand and make decisions through data, right? So if you're constantly adding new data points to these accounts or to these contacts, you're able to make more informed data decisions, or I should say decisions via data. And then the last thing, right, is the hardest thing, right, which is tracking attribution, making sure that you're able to match back not just that contact or that account to an individual campaign, but to understand holistically, right, what are the channels that drove me from meeting to opportunity to close. And I think that's really incredibly important, specifically from a marketing planning perspective, right? You don't want to just put your eggs in one basket, right? You don't just want to focus on where you made that sale, right? You don't want to just focus on events, so to speak, right? You want to make sure that you're covering everywhere, because we know buyers are everywhere. We know buyers are showing up to webinars. We know buyers are reading white papers. We know buyers are, sometimes doing their own research where they're sometimes reaching out directly to a sales rep. But you want to make sure that you're focusing on where your buyers are. And the best way of doing that is to accurately track attribution, and not just at the point where you made that win, but all those other points or that journey to where they eventually got to close. And this is just a really simple checklist. This is something that when me and my team work with marketers, it's just a way of doing what we refer to as a health check, right? And helping marketers define success, from the early stage, right? Which is looking at contact volume, bringing in new logos, focusing on what those email engagements look like. The mid stage, right? Which is focusing on conversions from when you bring those contacts in to bring them into being marketing qualified leads or sales qualified leads. And then of course the late stage, right? Which we touched on previously, but understanding that influence, understanding those opportunities have been opened against whatever that data source you're pulling from. The other thing, and these are some recommendations on reports that I think a lot of marketers and marketing ops professionals in particular should be pulling or creating, I should say, is reporting on things like contact import, what are the number of contacts that you brought in from this source? Providing reporting on email, right? Emails, engagements, because that's going to give you a general sense of, hey, we took 10 or 1,000 contacts from this source, but we're not seeing the performance. That should give you a really good indication that, hey, maybe that source isn't necessarily where you need to be in terms of outreach, because they're not giving you exactly what you want. So it's this continued measurement of success, and the only way you can do that is not just through tracking through attribution, but tracking through the engagements as they go through that whole entire life cycle of that whole entire customer journey.
All right, so our final FAQ today revolves around how you take intent data and then you incorporate it into call scripts and email templates. Any advice on that front?
Yeah, and I think this is something where, again, I hate to make it sound like another TechTarget shameless plug, but it's something that TechTarget can do through Priority Engine. In fact, one of the biggest things that we're able to do is provide contact level data against accounts, right? So, above and beyond just saying that this account's active around this set of topics, we're able to actually identify at the contact level that David Lane or that Jon Panker are doing research specifically against, these set of individual topics. And you can see kind of how that's illustrated. But, again, the way that we look at it is being able to understand these different entry points. And that's the most important thing, right? We know that, again, from our own media consumption surveys that we run across our entire user base, in APJ and across the world, that the best way of engaging a prospect is if you're speaking specifically to something that's been happening from a research perspective. That's what's going to get them the most attention. And more importantly, through email as well, too. Email is really the best medium to reach that, specifically if you're looking at it from an unsolicited perspective, right? If they don't know who you are. And, this is just a really good example of that, right? Of actually putting the intelligence into practice. And this is something that we share with, a lot of sales teams, BDRs in particular, as a way of, again, giving them that starting point and giving them a couple different ways of using that data, right? Because a lot of these contacts that a BDR or that an SDR may be engaging with may not necessarily know who that brand is or who that company may be, but by giving them the ability to use data to start that conversation, you don't necessarily have to go in cold, right? It's a little bit warmer than just, a contact that may come across your desk from a purchase list, for example.
So basically what we're looking at here is in each of the areas in brackets that are in red, you're basically filling in the blank from TechTarget's Priority Engine so that you're warming up an email, you're personalizing it in the hopes that somebody sees that as truly relevant to them and responds, correct?
Correct. I mean, if you even think about it, how you do your own purchases, right, John? Like say, for example, you're looking at running shoes. If Nike or Adidas or ASICS sent you a note and just said interested in running shoes, or, have you thought about, switching over to Nike? Of course, that's something that's going to be of interest to you because it's something that you've been actively researching against. And that's that B2C principle that can be brought over to B2B as well, too. I mean, at the end of the day, these buyers are no different than, buyers who are looking at and looking for purchases in their own personal lives.
Yep. And even more to the point, I think if Nike were to send me a note that said, hey, prepare for your upcoming 5K with these great shoes, knowing full well maybe that I had registered for a 5K, all of a sudden that email becomes really pertinent to what's going on in my life, and I'm more likely to open it and respond. Okay.
Exactly. That's a really good point. And then again, just another example, borrowing off of, like I said before, using that data and just kind of to orient, right? Being able to sort of fill in that based on the brackets, right? Hi, first name, or first name, last name, or whatever it may be, and just filling that information in and essentially matching, those key topics of interest that we know that individual prospect is doing research against versus what you are trying to get them to do, right? Which is to take a meeting and give them, the most valuable, commodity, which is their time. And that's really the most important thing to think about throughout all of this. The whole idea of being able to leverage data is to be able to ensure that you're getting time, right? Time to take a meeting, time to take a video call or whatever that may be.
Yep. And I'm willing to give my time to someone who's going to spend it wisely.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Dave, I want to wrap up and give people some advice as they're talking to the myriad of providers who are in this space. You included a few of them in a slide that you had in the presentation. What should we be asking potential intent providers before we enlist them to help us?
Yeah, I mean, the very first question I think anybody should ask is where their data is coming from, right? Being able to show you where that source of data occurs, right? Is it occurring on a website? Is it occurring within this data marketplace, right? A data sharing area. I think if someone's not willing to sort of pop open the hood, so to speak, and show you where the data is coming from, then that would kind of be a non-starter for me. I think that those partners and those possible vendors that you may want to work with from an intent perspective, the ones who are able to say, this is where our data comes from, here's how we track it, here's how we capture it, you want to lean more towards them because obviously, they have a little bit more, for lack of a better term, control on what's happening from a data perspective. The other thing, right, and this speaks to something that TechTarget's able to do, right, is do you have a direct relationship with the prospects, right? Are you able to engage them directly? The thing to think about more importantly is think about it in the realm of GDPR, right? Are these contacts that you're going to be receiving or these prospects that you're going to be receiving, can you even do anything with them, right? Do you have to go through some sort of legal channel? I think the thing that a lot of marketers are not necessarily nervous about, but it becomes a bit of a red flag is if they can't answer that question, are you GDPR compliant? The other thing, right, is asking, does your data integrate with the systems I currently use? And we talked about it before, how, even from a starting point, data can be overwhelming. It gets even more overwhelming when someone passes you a spreadsheet or, gives you data and says, hey, you go and deal with this, right? And then they don't come and act as a support system for you. Then you're sort of, from a marketing perspective, left with a bunch of names and a bunch of contacts without really much context. So I think that's really important, right? Is the information that you're receiving, going to be able to be put into your system and more importantly, put into action. And then the last thing, right, is in addition to sharing the account data, how can you help me influence active buyers at these accounts? And I think, above and beyond just, pointing at an account and saying, hey, we think that this account may be in market. There's really nothing else from that scenario. I think when you're looking at and trying to select an intent data provider, right, or a partner, I should say, the ones that are able to not just give you the data, but then kind of come up with a solution, whether it's things like TechTarget Priority Engine or content syndication, or even anything in the realm of something that's from a qualified perspective, from a being able to point out that there might be a project at that organization. I think those are the ones that you want to focus on because they obviously have more than just sort of one trick, right? Which is to pass you over something from an intent perspective. They're able to go a level underneath and say, let me help you in the spirit of partnership, engage with them, or help you understand who else you could be engaging with.
All right, Dave, I think we'll leave it there. A lot of really good information. We appreciate you sharing it. TechTarget continues to innovate when it comes to the collection and the presentation of intent data. Our Priority Engine tool is ready for yet another release. We would love to show it to you. If you're interested, please contact your TechTarget account manager. But for now, for Dave Lane, I'm Jon Panker. We thank you for your time. We invite you to continue to explore this issue on techtarget.com, and we wish you a very good day.